cooperation. To all the security personnel in the middle blocking the view, could you please move to the side, please? The security personnel. To all the security personnel in the middle, up front, kindly move to the side, please. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. To your excellencies, governors of the bank, honorable ministers and representatives of governments, executive directors, senior management and staff of the bank, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2023 Financial Presentation and Development Impact Luncheon here at the Restoration Tent in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. My name is Victor Aladokun, and as always, it's an absolute pleasure being your moderator during this session. Now, obviously you've noticed that there are no menus on the table, but I just want to tell you what's on the menu just in case you're curious. We have 3 items on the menu today. A first course consisting of a short video presentation, a second course that is a financial presentation, an impact report, and a main course that is the luncheon itself, which is why we're all here today. So, with that being said, the financial presentation and development impact report is a signature event here at the bank, one of our most important events, and it gives us an opportunity to take a look back over the last fiscal year to see how far we have come and the impact that we've had as a bank. Given the limitations of time, the Delivery Performance Management and Results Department has put together a very short video presentation, so I crave your indulgence. Turn your attention to the screens for a short video presentation.
Over the past year, Africa's recovery from the COVID pandemic has been put to the test by overlapping crises, but the continent has risen strong to face these challenges, working to become more resilient and self-sustaining than ever. At the African Development Bank, we are proud to have helped nurture this resilience, providing fast responses to hardships and planting the seeds for a strong recovery. For example, our resilience program in the Sahel is improving living conditions, nutrition security, and climate change readiness for more than 1 million people in vulnerable communities, such as fish farmers and agro-pastoralists across 6 countries in the region, ultimately building a more equitable, integrated, and productive future for more than 5.5 million African people. The energy projects we support in Egypt are also promoting local resilience, creating stronger, greener infrastructure that will power the economy and help free up much-needed resources for other critical areas like healthcare and social safety nets, building paths out of poverty. And we know these outcomes are real because we track our impact. Take our energy investments in Cameroon, for example. In the past 10 years, along with contributions from other development partners, they have helped over 5 million households gain access to electricity, paving the way for outstanding social progress across many dimensions, such as the 43% increase in youth employment in Bamenda. And these are only 3 of the over 5,200 projects we have invested in across the continent since 1967. Despite the challenging operating environment, 2022 saw bank investments exceeding $8 billion, including $1.5 billion towards an emergency response facility to ease the food crisis affecting the continent. The rise of the bank's status from 4th to 1st position within the Aid Transparency Index recognizes our commitment to transparent reporting on our work in the field and our continued contribution towards a prosperous and sustainable future for Africa. To learn more about our work and impact, see this year's edition of the Annual Development Effectiveness Review.
Ladies and gentlemen, following that very informative but short video presentation, kindly give a warm welcome as she comes to the podium, the ever elegant Senior Vice President of the bank with a very powerful name, Swazi Shabalala. A warm welcome. I know it's midday, we're a little bit hungry, we're going to move proceedings faster, but please, we can do better than that. Swazi Shabalala.
Good afternoon and welcome to all of you honorable governors, President Adesina, distinguished guests, honorable ministers, and bank colleagues. Bienvenue. Let me start by expressing my sincere gratitude to the government of the Arab Republic of Egypt for an outstanding hospitality and excellent support in the organization of these annual meetings, especially to His Excellency Mr. Hassan Abdallah, Governor of the Central Bank of Egypt and the bank's acting governor. Distinguished governors and participants, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the annual financial presentation and development impact review luncheon, an important feature of the bank's annual meetings. I will focus my remarks on the annual development effectiveness review, and you will hear from our finance team presenting their financial performance last year during the panel discussion. This 13th annual review examines where we did well and where we still need to improve. This edition of the annual review confirms what we all know, that 3 years after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the development landscape remains challenging and uncertain, marked by inflationary pressures, rising public debt, conflict and insecurity, and the intensifying impacts of climate change, and of course, the threats to Africa's food security exacerbated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The confluence of these multiple challenges has hampered the continent's recovery efforts, with Africa's economic growth dropping by 1% from last year. Even more concerning, an additional 15 million people were pushed into extreme poverty. Despite this challenging environment, the bank has remained agile and responsive to the changing needs of African countries. Through transformative projects across the bank's high five operational priorities, in 2022, we invested over $8 billion to support the continent's recovery. These investments included the $1.5 billion Africa Emergency Food Production Facility as a response to the prospect of a major food crisis on the continent. Overall, the bank's support to the agriculture sector benefited 2.9 million people in 2022. Africa's development and industrialization, to give effect to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, requires, as a precondition, universal access to energy. We accelerated our efforts in this regard, and in 2022, our investments in the energy sector facilitated access to electricity for an additional 1.3 million people. Improving the living conditions of Africans also means greater access to water and sanitation. And thanks to our investments, 12.3 million people gained access to new or improved water and sanitation services in 2022. We are pleased that 2 of the projects in this sector were supported by the $2 billion Room to Run sovereign transaction, thanks to the government of the United Kingdom and the private sector. Recognizing the critical importance of access to finance in enterprise development, the bank's operations provided nearly 400,000 micro, small, and medium enterprises with much needed financing. 2022 was a seminal year, with the bank making its largest investments in a single year in regional integration for an amount of $1.5 billion. Climate change is a global existential threat. African countries, while contributing the least to global carbon emissions, face the prospect of dire outcomes if urgent action is not taken. However, these actions must be just and support Africa's development. In 2022, the bank again exceeded its climate finance commitments by allocating 45% of its annual investments towards climate finance against a corporate target of 40%. Furthermore, we have surpassed our commitment to prioritizing climate adaptation by allocating 68% of these investments towards this effort. Distinguished governors, to achieve these results, the bank has embraced a continuous program of institutional reforms because we are a learning organization. As the challenges faced by the continent become more complex, we understand the need to look for opportunities to strengthen our capacity and enhance our efficiency, effectiveness to achieve greater development impact. First of all, we recognize that the staff of the bank is its best asset. To continue delivering sustainable solutions for Africa, we need to recruit the best and the brightest, passionate and devoted to Africa's development. We are now embedding many of our recent policy changes in human resources to ensure that we deploy the best talent we can as close as possible to our clients, public and private. In fact, steady progress has been made in moving closer to our clients, with most of our sector experts operating from regional and country offices, and 70%, or over 70% of our operations managed in decentralized offices. At the corporate level, our commitment to transparency and accountability received global recognition. The bank was ranked as the most transparent development organization among 50 other global development institutions by Publish What You Fund. This recognition is important in reaffirming our privileged position in the continent, and one that we can leverage to mobilize vital resources for Africa's development. During this challenging period, the bank maintained its AAA rating, supporting our ability to innovate in resource mobilization as we endeavor to be Africa's solutions bank. We believe that our successes in resource mobilization, including the recent 16th replenishment of the African Development Fund, the largest in its history, reflects the trust that I believe the bank has earned over the years. We are committed to being worthy of this trust, especially as all MDBs today are being asked to make reality the call of billions to trillions made years ago, so that it does not disappear into the mists of history at a time of such need. Our actions as Africa's premier development institutions are consequential and more urgent than ever. We stand before you today and this whole week to share what we have done, how well we have done it, and what more we need to do. We do so with humility because we understand that alone our mandate is unachievable, but together there is nothing that we cannot achieve. Thank you, and I hope that you will find the panel discussion interesting and that you will leave here filled with hope as I am. Now I can yield the floor to today's moderator, the very capable Dr. Victor Oladokun. Thank you, merci beaucoup, shukran.
Thank you, Senior Vice President Swazi Shabalala, for those remarks. I'm actually glad that we have quite a number of our vice presidents in the audience today. So following those remarks, it only seems fitting that I should invite a number of them onto the platform for a quick conversation. So join me in welcoming as they come up to the platform, Solomon Quainer, the Vice President, Private Sector, Infrastructure and Industrialization. Also, Kevin Kariuki, Vice President, Power, Energy, Climate and Green Growth. Beth Dumford, Vice President, Agriculture, Human and Social Development. Marie-Laure Akinolugbade, Vice I think we're going to have to wait a moment. Marie-Laure Akinolugbade, Vice President, Regional Development, Integration and Business Delivery. And representing the Vice President, Finance, Jack Jopak, Director of Financial Management, who is representing Hassatu Nsele, the Vice President of Finance. Give him a warm welcome. You may be seated. My first question is going to be to Marie-Laure. As we've heard during most of our sessions here, during the plenaries and the meetings with governors, what we do know is that multiple crises, particularly over the last 3 years, have left a number of African countries in a very vulnerable situation, some of them very, very severely. What is the bank's response to its member countries who find themselves in this situation?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Indeed, our continent has been hard hit
If you could turn up the volume, that would be great. Thank you.
We can't hear. On
You good?
n'entend pas bien. Non, je disais que le continent.
As I was saying, the continent has been hard hit by a variety of crises. The senior vice president did talk about this. Despite those crises, we should acknowledge that the continent has displayed remarkable resilience with positive real growth rates, and this has been quite a tremendous feat. The African Development Bank Group has done what we know to do best, and it is to mobilize significant financing, but also to provide technical assistance, capacity building, and has also played its advocacy role to ensure that the voice of the continent in this respect is heard, and it has also been able to mobilize considerable partnership, including in knowledge development, so as to get common solutions to all those issues. In the area of mobilization, finance mobilization, as has been said, in 2022, we actually scaled up our activities, and we have approvals increasing 37% relative to 2021. And in this percentage of approvals, let me mention three main points. First, we increased the headroom for financing investment projects because we are good, and we have been so good, in addressing the health crisis. We were able to step in when there was the food crisis, and I know Beth will be speaking to this. But especially, we continued to invest in the bank's high fives, without which the resilience and capacity to produce wealth and eradicate poverty would not have been possible. We also continued to work on regional integration. As has been said, more than 30% of approvals were in cross-border projects. We also scaled up approvals for private sector operations with a twofold increase of approvals relative to 2021. So while we are addressing the crisis, we are keeping the momentum in terms of implementing transformational projects for our countries. Thank you.
You have to make a request of the technical team to my right. There's quite a distance between where we are and the guests at the bank. This is almost the length of a football field, and therefore very difficult for our guests in the bank to see who's on the platform. So if you could project the panelists onto the screen for better visibility, that would be much appreciated. I'm going to quickly jump to Jacques. You're on the financial hot seat, as it were. As Marie-Laure has said, and as we've talked about during these sessions, 2022 was a very challenging year. Globally, not just for the bank. High volatile markets, rising inflation and interest rates, the negative impact of credit downgrades on many African countries. So my question to you is, how has the bank been able to weather the storm, and what has the impact been on the bank's capital, its net income, and its funding programs in the midst of all of these challenges?
Merci beaucoup pour cette question.
I thank you very much for your question. And to answer your question, let me highlight the strength of the bank with respect to its financial solidity. As you are aware, the bank came under pressure in 2022 with a multifaceted crisis. The COVID-19 crisis and the recent Ukraine crisis. And all those crises really had an impact on the capital markets volatility. But despite this very difficult backdrop, the African Development Bank was able to maintain its AAA rating, as evidenced by what the leading rating agencies demonstrated, Moody's, Fitch, and S&P. So those rating agencies deemed that the bank's financial solidity is rated excellent. This is one of the criteria. The second criterion is that the bank's liquidity is also rated excellent by most of the rating agencies. A second very important point to mention is that the bank's shareholders, following the capital increase, actually accelerated their contributions, and as such the bank was able to have a capital windfall such that today it is in a position to provide counter-cyclical assistance to the recipient countries. In this respect, let me mention that in our current financial projections, all the prudential ratios monitored by rating agencies are really buoyant and are in consistency with the bank's long-term financial sustainability approved by the executive directors in 2020. With respect to the net income, which was your last question, the bank, notwithstanding the difficult environment, had a net income of 239 million units of account before distributions. And this is really considerable. Thank you.
And thank you for all that you and your team do. And for those of you who may not know, Jack just had a few moments' notice before he came on the stage, so kindly give him a warm round of applause again there. I'm going to come all the way to the very end to Solomon. As you know, the private sector, Africa's private sector, is the biggest, the largest driver for Africa's economy, period. It accounts for 90% of jobs, 70% of investments, and 70% of our GDP. This being the case, the private sector really is the best engine for job creation and inclusive green growth on the continent. What are some of the key things that the bank is doing to drive growth in the private sector? That's your remit, so talk to us about that.
Okay. I hope you can hear me very well. Okay. No, thank you very much, Egbo. Thank you very much. I mean, just feeding off the last point that Jacques made around net income, the private sector business for the institution is very important. And, Swazi has a favorite phrase. She calls it the Black Swan events. I mean, the Black Swan events that took place in, am I okay? Yeah, the Black Swan events that started in 2020 led to a situation where we were not doing as much private sector investments as we would like to do. But the good news is that in 2022, we had recovered in terms of the amount of business we're doing in private sector to the levels, the pre-COVID levels. So I think this is the key message that I'd like to give, and it's thanks really to us working together as one bank to deliver. So I'd like to say, great work by the entire team. And it's good also that, when you disaggregate, the near $2 billion of private sector investments that we made, the geographic distribution is good. We need to improve a little bit, in the western region and definitely in the central region. When you also take a look at the sector distribution, it's decent. But we, in ramping up to actually meet our pre-COVID levels, we've also ramped up a lot in the financial sector. But if you look at the pipelines, from Kevin, from Beth, energy, agri, the pipelines are looking strong. and we expect to see that in 2023. Okay, is it okay? You can hear me, yes. So, in terms of the 2022 performance, pretty good. In terms of the 2022 performance, pretty good. But we've got to think about how we're doing this going forward. And the good news is that we captured this in a new private sector development strategy that was approved for 2021 to 2025 after very active discussions, with our board, very detailed consultations, with our regional member countries, the African countries. And this was approved by the board in January of 2022. In addition, especially given the theme around the annual meetings of mobilizing private sector finance for green infrastructure and also climate-related resiliency, we approved a PPP framework as well. And this gives us the tool to really try to attract private sector in a massive way with speed and also with scale. So these are some of the messages that I want to give, that from a private sector perspective, we're back in the game, we're doing well, we're setting ourselves up strategically and also in terms of performance in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Solomon. I'm just going to ask our panelists to ensure that you're speaking directly into the mics. They're very directional, just so that our guests can have an opportunity to hear clearly what is being said. Better still, if you do have any of the translation devices and you put them on, you'll actually hear what is being said on the platform a whole lot better. And then finally, my last ask to our technical team, please put a large wide shot on the platform, not individual shots, wide shots so that our guests can see who's on the platform. Thank you very much. I'm going to come next to Kevin. As we know, access to climate finance has been a huge problem, particularly for Africa, and in order to achieve the SDG 13, that's been a big challenge for us. What is the bank doing to access climate finance at scale for Africa, given the many challenges that we're dealing with?
Thank you very much, Victor. I think it is true that if I were to contextualize, Africa accounts for a very small amount of global climate finance. The latest statistics show that Africa accounts for only 4.5% of global climate finance, against which translates to about $30 billion, which compares very poorly with the demand, which we expect to be about $277 billion. And that is why the bank has taken a number of steps to address this particular issue. Firstly, we committed to allocate 40% of our investments as climate finance. As SVP Swazi mentioned, we already did 45% last year. The year before, we did 41%. Secondly, beyond that threshold, we also came up with efforts to mobilize $25 billion of climate finance between up to 2025. And then what we've done is that was not even enough. What we've done is that we went forward and came up with a Global Center on Adaptation and came up with the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program with a view to raising another $25 billion as adaptation finance. So in total, we are hoping to be able to raise $37.5 billion of climate finance by 2025. But then, even looking more, we said this is not enough. And what we did as part of our 2020, as part of our climate change and green growth strategy, we saw that is not enough, and we seek to increase Africa's access to climate finance from the 3% that was applicable 2 years ago to 10% by 2030. But then we didn't stop on our rails still. Last year, most of you will also be aware that we established the Climate Action Window, which aims to mobilize up to between $4 and $13 billion. Already, we have received commitments of $429 million from the UK, from Germany, from the Netherlands, and from the Switzerland. And we are truly, truly grateful as far as that is concerned. And lastly, during these annual meetings, we have received fairly positive indications that there are a number of other countries that are actively considering committing towards the climate action window as well. So we are also grateful to them in advance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Really appreciate it. To all of our panelists, I know there's a ton of things that you can talk about what's happening in your complexes and within the bank. But because we have a limited amount of time, I just want you to limit your responses to maximum, probably 120 seconds, 2 minutes at the most, so that our guests can soon begin eating. So is that a deal?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Since we're talking about food, I'm going to come to Beth. As you know, Africa has a food crisis. Can Africa avert an even worse crisis? And what is it that the bank is doing to help ensure that it's able to do so and also become much more food resilient?
Thank you very much for that question, Victor. And I think when you have a war 1,000 miles away that throws millions of Africans into hunger and poverty, it's really a wake-up call. And with the leadership of President Adesina, together with His Excellency Macky Sall, in January, they called the Dakar 2 Summit, which was an extraordinary summit by any measure, with 37 heads of state and government attending, which was a call to action to support and reinvest in agriculture so Africa could feed itself. Well before Dakar 2 happened, the board approved a $1.5 billion African Emergency Food Response Facility. And this was approved in record time. Again, by the end of last year, the board had approved operations in 35 countries to really get improved seeds, climate-adapted seeds in the hands of farmers at scale, and also fertilizer. And again, this has scaled in record time, even beyond the figures that you saw earlier. It has reached 6.4 million farmers. It's also distributed over 400,000 metric tons of seed and 1.4 million metric tons of fertilizer. Again, getting these improved climate-adaptive inputs in the hands of farmers is really helping to provide the groundwork that we need to help Africa feed itself and then feed the world. However, even with the most innovative climate-adaptive technologies at scale, we do know that weather-related shocks are becoming more frequent, more severe, more unpredictable, and that it's very important to help countries and populations manage through these shocks. Governments are spending millions to help their population, and what we're doing through our disaster risk financing mechanism is helping countries buy risk insurance so that when a drought or a shock occurs, they can get a payout. And $14 million. So this is
We can't hear the speaker. There's a lot of noise. And as you're aware of the statistics about 85% of people in Africa are living either in areas of insecurity or very close to areas of insecurity. We have more than 34 million people of displaced persons over the continent, and this figure is on the rise. Insecurity, fragility has no borders. As you're aware, this is a reality we have to contend with. So in the first phase, we have a very clear policy which was approved last year as to how we intervene in areas of insecurity and fragility. We do have a certain number of guiding principles. First, we have to remain engaged, whatever the situation is. Nobody should be left behind. Thirdly, we need to ensure that we should not create anything that's going to cause harm. Fourthly, we should ensure that the most vulnerable population are not left behind. And what this means is that, and this starts with a strong presence in the countries. We do have field offices, country offices in 16 out of the 25 countries which are considered to be fragile. We have more than 200 staff out in the field, and we're asking them to ensure that we work in partnership with several stakeholders around the nexus: peace, security, development, investment, growth. And we have seen that with these new partnerships, we have leverage. We work with the African Union, and it is in this context with the African Union that the bank was able to support the peace process between Ethiopia and the rebellion in the Tigray region. And we are getting involved most at the preventive stage. And when conflicts emerge, we have the possibility to intervene in the most remote areas through the delegation of task and responsibility. We do work mainly with the civil society.
I'm going to come to Kevin next. When we launched the New Deal on Energy a number of years ago, we talked about 600 million Africans being without access to electricity. Today, we're still talking about 600 million Africans still not having access. Help us understand why that is the case and what it is, or when it is that you think Africa will achieve universal access, particularly by 2030.
In this case, the challenge is absolute terms. In absolute terms, we may appear not to have met or made any progress. However, as President Adesina mentioned yesterday, Africa has seen increase in access from 43% when we did the New Deal on Energy to 56% currently. But having said that, so it's the issue is population growth is masking the progress that we have made as far as increased access is concerned. However, the COVID-19 caused 30 million people to lose access to electricity because they simply could not afford it on account of the different levels of economic slowdown that resulted. That's number. But having said that, if you look at what the bank is doing, since the New Deal on Energy, we have been able to connect 20 million people with the first-time access to electricity. And that is why countries such as Kenya and Rwanda have increased their access to over 75% and 61% respectively. In addition, and cognizant that we need to achieve Sustainable Development Goal on energy by 2030, we are doubling down on programs that will accelerate and reduce by focusing on the countries that have the greatest deficit on electricity. Here we have examples of Nigeria, DRC, and Ethiopia. But most importantly, you'll be pleased to note that the Desert to Power project, which is our flagship project, and we are implementing, will be able to connect 250 million people by 2030. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Permit me, therefore, to come to, I think the natural progression would be to come to Solomon next. Kevin just mentioned the need to scale up financing to adapt Africa's economies to climate change and what the bank is doing in that regard. But there is also a growing call to green Africa's infrastructure. Share with us what the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa is all about and what the intended purpose is. Again, let's keep it brief because we're going to end this session very, very quickly or very soon so that our guests can dig in. Let's keep our responses very short.
So thank you very much, Victor. I mean, when you are innovating, you don't always get it right the first time. So as we received the challenge from President Adesina to innovate around how we can, with scale and speed, bring transformational green infrastructure into play in Africa, we started off by compiling all our different projects and saying that this is it, especially using the Baobab example. But the president said no. The Baobab example is about really a challenge that needs everybody to bring their hands together in a complementary way to achieve something that we're not able to achieve on our own. Now, the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa is exactly that. Anybody who knows infrastructure project development in Africa and its challenges and what it needs to correct, you know it's really the lack of bankable projects. You know it's also, a long gestation period to develop projects. So the Alliance for Green Infrastructure intends to bring all the parties together, the DFIs, the foundations, the non-state actors, the African Sovereign Investors Forum as a representation of institutional investors to raise $500 million for project development especially, and also project preparation. So project development is going to be with a commercial thinking. And to raise that to catalyze $10 billion of investment faster and with scale. And for us, this is actually going to be transformational because we have all the parties around the table. We'll do the project development, we'll invest to get the construction done, to get the stability of cash flows achieved, and then we as DFIs will provide the credit enhancements to bring in the institutional investors who are the ones who are going to bring the $134 trillion worth of institutional capital into the green infrastructure space. Transformational. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Solomon. I'm going to come to Beth next with actually the next question here. Education in science, in technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM as it's called, has the potential to produce graduates who can deliver solutions to many of Africa's challenging problems. However, there's a shortage of STEM education on the continent, particularly compared to other regions. What can and must Africa do to reverse this situation?
Thank you for the question, Victor. And I think that it's really important. We can all agree that access to higher education provides opportunity, higher incomes, and importantly, the skills that we need to provide climate solutions for the continent. Globally, 38% of the population has access to higher education. In North Africa, 36% of the population has access to higher education. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's 9%. Only 9% of the population have access to this education. And within that, again, the science, engineering, technology, mathematics doesn't have the right enough resources, the expertise, the facilities that are needed. So we are working to address this gap. Recently, a few weeks ago, I was in Namibia, where I was able to visit a state-of-the-art veterinary training hospital funded by the African Development Bank. And in this veterinary training hospital that brings in students from all over Southern Africa as a center of excellence, they're training the next generations of veterinarians, the next generation of animal scientists, animal specialists. Now, this is really important because the economy in Namibia is dependent upon livestock. Namibian beef is exported to China, the European Union, the United States, and again, these new vets that graduated last year, all of them are employed. Some of them set up shop for themselves, some of them went to work for government. But again, it's this type of skills and techniques that we need to bring in more higher education, also technical and vocational training that we're looking to scale up across the continent to help train another generation of leaders to solve the continent's problems and drive forward the economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's about all the time that we have on this session. It's been a great discussion, but I'm not about to let you off the hook yet. I'm going to give you, each one of you, starting with Solomon at the end, working your way all the back here. What is it? Because at the end of the day, the work that we do here at the bank is about making a difference in the lives of the 1.4 billion people here in Africa. What we do is more than a job. It's more than a title. So my question to you in 60 seconds, what is it that keeps you awake at night, and what are you most passionate about in the work that you do? Solomon, I'm going to start with you first. 60 seconds each.
Yes, so what keeps me up awake is with all the things that we need to do for Africa to become well developed, to have the jobs that, our populations need. How can we really sometimes only prioritize because the needs are so great? So, this keeps me up, and this really is what keeps turning me around. But what motivates me the most is the youth, the dynamism of youth, the entrepreneurial of youth, and of course I have children. So I see this also in my children, and that is really what motivates me and gets me going.
Thank you very much. Kevin.
Thank you. What keeps me awake is how can we eliminate energy poverty on the continent, and in particular, eliminate cooking with biomass and dung, which constitute about 80% of the cooking in Africa. So that's why for us, we are relentless in the pursuit of ensuring that every African has access to modern energy and affordable energy on the continent. Thank you.
Beth.
Thank you. I'm a mother of 3 beautiful children. And as a mother, and I think as a person, when you meet another mother who cannot feed their child, it's something that sticks with you. And having met many mothers early in my career, it's what's driven me. And under the President's leadership, really recognizing that we have the tools, the expertise, the knowledge here on the African continent, so that no mother should ever have to be in a situation like that. So that's what keeps me up at night.
What makes me passionate is the fact that I strongly believe in the youth of this continent. I believe that they are extremely resourceful, and I believe that they can change this continent with or without those who lead the continent at the moment. So this gives me a lot of hope. Obviously, what keeps me awake at night, and I discussed it a little bit, is the multiplication of conflict, senseless conflict, because we still have to rebuild. It takes us backwards, and I wish every person realized the responsibility that we have one towards another.
Thank you. And over to Jack. You're complex. Your vice president handles finance for the bank. What keeps you awake at night, and what are you most passionate about?
Alors, ce qui me passionne.
I'm passionate about, in my position as in the finance complex of the bank, how to innovate, how to embark on financial innovations with a view to providing more resources to our countries for them to be able to overcome the development challenges they are confronted with. Now, to achieve this goal, the African Development Bank is recognized as one of the pioneers and among MDBs through its innovations. How the challenge is how to leverage effect on the resources that we have to do more with less. This is what I'm passionate about. And we have achieved some remarkable results. Let me just give an example. Currently, we are in the process. The African Development Fund will now go to the financial markets, mobilize private resources to have greater impact in development financing of our low-income countries. We are talking about $18 billion, additional $18 billion that could be raised in the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Vice President Solomon Quainer, Kevin Kariuki, Beth Dunford, Marilaw Akin-Olugbade, and to our Director of Finance Management, Jacques Joffak. Thank you very much for adding value to this situation, to this session rather today, but also humanizing and putting in human terms the work that you do. Very much appreciated. Thank you very much to our governors, to the executive directors, and to all of our invited guests. We'd like to say a very big thank you for being with us here today. We will proceed now with the third item on our menu, which is the luncheon itself. Don't forget, at 3 o'clock in the capital, the main plenary hall today, we will be kicking off Africa Day. Don't miss it. It's going to be an exciting experience. My name is Victor Ladukun, and it's been a wonderful pleasure being your moderator this afternoon. God bless you. Bon appetit.
balele bengalele jalo balele bengadlanga abakwazi ukuthi